Hey there, I'm Tyler and I'm here to show you how to install your own set of IE turbo inlet pipes on your C8 Audi RS6 or RS7 4OT. It's a very straightforward procedure that only requires a few hand tools and maybe a bit of patience, but if I can do it, so can you. Before you start, you're going to want to make sure you unpack your IE turbo inlet pipe kit and make sure you have everything included. You should have a driver and passenger side set of cast turbo inlet pipes, 2 larger pieces of silicone. These will replace the silicone that came with your IE cold air intake kit, 2 large hose clamps, 2 smaller hose clamps, 6 Allens with washers, 2 O-rings, and 2 turbo inlet pipe adapters. To complete the installation, you'll just need a few basic hand tools, including a flathead screwdriver, ratchet with a longer extension, a wobbly 7mm socket, T30 Torx, 5mm Allen, and you'll need a longer 5mm Allen, whether that's a socket or an Allen wrench. And to uninstall or reinstall an IE cold air intake lid, you'll need a 3mm Allen as well. And while not required, but very helpful, an extendable magnet, a pick with a duller end, black RTV, and some silicone spray. Before you start unassembling anything, make sure you've given your car plenty of time to cool down. You don't want to be working around a hot engine bay. We are going to be down near the turbos. Start by opening the hood. And this first step, you don't need any tools. You just need to remove the factory engine cover. That's simple to do. You just kind of want to start by pulling up on the corners and popping it right off the grommets. Set that out of the way. Now you're ready to disassemble your upper intake lid. The whole intake doesn't have to come off, just the upper lid. Start with the silicone couplers on the turbo inlets. That's going to be a 7mm socket. Now we're ready to start undoing the upper lid. If you're uninstalling an IE cold air intake, you're going to need a 3mm Allen to undo the top 12 bolts. If you're starting all the way and you're installing an intake and inlets together, you're going to need a T25 Torx to undo the 11 bolts on the factory upper lid to remove that. I'm removing one of our cold air intakes, and that's 12 3mm. I've already gone ahead and done most of them. Once all your bolts are removed and your upper silicone clamps are loose, the whole thing will just pop right off. And set that aside. Now that the upper intake lid is off, we've got room to start working on getting the turbo inlets off. The first part's going to be getting this upper vacuum hard line off. That one's super easy. You just pull up on it and that'll release the clips. And when you get the PVC reroute or breather line off, these are kind of a pain and you're going to have to pry on them a little bit. The trick here is to give it equal pressure as you pry back on it. If you have a not very sharp, a dull end pick, that can sometimes help as well. Pull those off. There is this is a PVC line, so a little bit of oil in here is normal. So you shouldn't have excessive pouring out amounts, but a little bit of oil vapor left over is completely normal. Now we're ready to start getting the turbo inlets out. There's 6 bolts holding these in, 2 on the top, and then 1 on the bottom. To loosen the bolts, you'll need a T30 Torx. And if you come in kind of close here, this one's pulling out, you'll see it. So these factory turbo inlets have a little plastic sleeve inside. What that does is when you're installing it helps center the bolt so that it lines up with the holes a little easier. And I'll pull it out so I can kind of show you. Each bolt is going to have one of these. And when you're installing your turbo inlet, all that does is help stabilize and center the bolts to make it easier to line them up with the threads. You don't want to lose these as you pull them out. However, they are not required to reinstall turbo inlets. The IE turbo inlets are machined to accept these, so you can reinstall with these and they can make life a little easier. But if something goes wrong and you drop one and you can't find it, it's not going to stop you from installing your turbo inlet. Now you're ready to attack the lower bolts on the turbo inlets. The easiest way to go after this is to use a little wobbly with some electrical tape on it. What that tape is going to do is allow you to put your T30 on there and kind of put it at a bend where you want it without this flopping around and you trying to fight it. So it just gives some resistance to that corner while you can still get it on there. I'm just going to slide it in here from the bottom to get it lined up. And then you don't want to drop that bolt down into the engine where you can't find it. So I'm going to go ahead and get a magnet on it as I start loosening these threads. And once we're all the way out, pull it out with a magnet. All right, now it's going to be the same process for the other lower bolt. And same as last time, I'm just going to make sure I get a magnet on that as it comes out. And there you go. From here, the turbo inlets are mostly ready to come out. There is a O-ring seal on the top on these breather lines. You're just going to kind of help it get that O-ring off like this. Keep up everything out of the way. One out. Same exact process on the second one. Push down on that to unseat the O-ring. We'll slide out. All right, now you're ready to prep your turbo inlets for install. For this step, you're going to need your adapter rings that either came in your kit or you bought separately for a hybrid turbo, and your O-rings that are included with the kit. And while not required, I would recommend a little bit of black RTV to help keep the O-rings in place while you install them in the car. First, you're going to need your adapter rings. These function as the part that will transfer the air smoothly to your turbochargers. We have them for stock turbos or for optional hybrid turbos. When you install these, you're going to want to remember that airflow comes through the front of the turbo inlet. So the IE logo is facing towards you. And you don't want a hard edge on the inside. So if you install one of these backwards, there'll be a big stop on the inside. You don't want that lip. This should be smooth for smooth airflow. So install that with the taper so that it is a smooth transition from the cast inlet all the way through. Once you're happy with that, take a little bit of your black RTV and just hit 4 corners. Doesn't take a lot, guys. The included O-ring. And press that down all the way. Now, I'm just going to take a clean rag and wipe off any excess RTV on the flange. This RTV isn't making a seal, it's just simply helping keep the O-ring in place while you install it. We're going to do that same process on the second one. Insert the ring, check the taper, just a tiny bit of RTV, insert the O-ring, and then clean up any excess. And take your time on this, because if you get any RTV on the flange part, it'll clean up really well. But if you get any on the casting part, it's going to stain really easy, and you want these to stay looking nice, right? Now we're ready to install them on the car. Your kit's going to include new Allen bolts. These are going to give you a stronger connection than the factory to replace. Prep those ahead of time by just putting the washers on them and laying them out on your work surface. There's no wrong order if you want to put right or left on first, but you do want to make sure they're on the right side. Just line up this O-ring port to know you're on the right one. And before we install that, we're going to put a little bit of silicone spray. Just to make sure that this O-ring doesn't catch. You're going to start by kind of pushing that in there. If you're going to reuse your fancy little black factory locator, slide that onto your bolt. And start the bolt by hand. We'll need a 5mm on an extension. And you're going to want to leave these bolts finger loose until they're all lined up. For these upper ones, a Allen wrench with a ball end or a long one can help line those up. And using the same trick as before, we're going to put our 5mm Allen on an extension wobbly with some electrical tape on it. And carefully fish this in. And I'm going to use a magnet to kind of guide the end of my bolt to where I want it. And once your lower bolt is all the way tight and your uppers are in, go ahead and give that a good, and tighten your uppers as well. You're going to want these to be pretty tight. And then you do that same process again on the other side. Before you install any bolts, just make sure all your lines are ran correctly and they're going to line up so you don't have anything pinched or in the wrong spot. Another trick to installing these lower ones is to use your factory isolator. That'll help keep the washer on there and less chances of it falling off as you're trying to line it up. Now that our turbo inlets are larger, our silicone is also larger. We're going to go ahead and use a 7mm socket to loosen the hose clamps and remove the silicone that came with your intake. And use the new silicone that's been supplied with your new turbo inlets. And when tightening these, you're just going to want to keep downward pressure on that as you tighten. You want it to be tight enough that these clamps are keeping them secure on the carbon, but not so tight that you're cracking the carbon, just like when you originally installed your intake with the existing silicone. We're going to go ahead and pre-install the new larger clamps. What you're looking for here is a nice tight seal all the way around the silicone on the inlet, and that all your bowl holes line up on the top of your intake lid. And we're not going to tighten these clamps yet. Now we can take a quick second and reinstall the PVC lines, same as factory. Takes much less effort to put on than it did come off. And then the hard line on the top will clip in just like stock. And now we're ready to reinstall our intake bolts. Now you can loosely install all 12 of your Allen bolts. You're not going to tighten any of these all the way yet. Now that all 12 of my bolts are installed loosely, I can make sure that my couplers are fully lined up with the inlet. Give that a little bit of pressure, and then keeping pressure on the front of the intake. Start tightening all the bolts. Just as outlined in the cold air intake install guide, these don't need to be super tight. You don't want to crack the carbon. Now we're going to use a 7mm socket to tighten the hose clamps. Double check all your line connections, make sure nothing was rubbed or pinched and everything sits the same as it did stock. Reinstall your engine cover. I'm going to use a clean microfiber cloth just to remove any fingerprints I may have got on my pretty IE carbon fiber intake, so I can step back and really appreciate all my own work. Now it's time to go take this thing for a drive. If you have any questions at all about installing your own turbo inlets, you can download a full step-by-step, in-depth color photo install guide right on the product page on our website in a PDF. Also, feel free to give our awesome customer support team a call with any questions you might have. They're always happy to help. Enjoy your IE turbo inlets and live fast, buy fun.